And grudges. It will be 6 to 8 minutes for our timer. Please welcome Christy Pichari, Perspectives and Grudges. Thank you.
All right.
The timer is having an issue. Hold on just a moment. It's been said that your formative years, ages 0 to 8, things that happen in those times affect our lives for the rest of them that we live. There can be different occurrences, maybe tragedies, maybe little joyous moments. I'm going to tell you one of my grudges that started as a very young child and only continued to build to a point where I wanted to kick this person out of my life completely at the age of 17. My Uncle Joe was my dad's older brother. Every time I saw Uncle Joe, he was drinking, he was laughing, he was having a good time. I remember being 5 years old and hanging out, trying to be around the adults, and I was a kid. And it was adult time, and Uncle Joe told me, Christy, go out front and pick up every rock out of that lawn of yours and get it out. And I said, well, there's no rocks in the lawn. He says, you're not looking hard enough. So I went out there and I started looking, and sure enough, there was a couple of rocks here and there, and we had a lawn bigger than the size of this room. So mind you, it took me a while to get a lot of rocks. I didn't even get a quarter of the way through when everybody was saying goodbye. I felt really left out. My dad was drinking more than he usually did, because when Uncle Joe was around, that's when my dad had a fun time and hung out. But I used to hear stories about Uncle Joe from my dad. My dad grew up really poor. And his mom used to make mustard sandwiches with a little bit of sugar on them, because that's how poor they were. They could afford mustard and they could have some bread. So once in a while, when they had enough money, my grandma would make pudding. And she had 5 kids, so she had to make sure she had it all evened out just right for the 5 kids. And this pudding was the biggest treat. And my Uncle Joe would do this to my little dad. Here he is 10 years old and my dad is 3. Take his thumb and stick it right smack in the middle of his pudding and lick it. And my dad would cry and Uncle Joe would end up with my dad's pudding. Now mind you, I've heard about this since I was very young. As I said, my dad would drink a little more when Uncle Joe was around. We wouldn't hear from him much unless he was calling in the middle of the night to see what my dad was up to, because he'd been drunk all night and partying with his friends or whatever. As far as I knew, Uncle Joe was the bad guy. He was the bad guy that would cause issues with my mom and dad, as far as my mom getting upset about the phone ringing. Back when it used to ring, it wasn't just a beep beep or those nice conveniences we have today. Back then it was a real ring ring, and the whole house woke up. Uncle Joe didn't really think about that so much. He was in an adult frame, I guess. I don't know. Did that so much during my childhood. Fast forward to I'm 17 years old. I had an opportunity to go to Las Vegas and have a professional modeling shoot. I was so excited. I was so excited. I knew it was going to be a long drive, and my dad was going to go with me. It was going to be a father-daughter trip. I couldn't wait. You see, I grew up in a family, being the oldest of 4 in my immediate family. And getting alone time with Dad was rare. So here I was going to have about 5 days with just me and my dad. And who calls? Uncle Joe. I know you're going to Vegas. I was wondering if I could catch a ride. Of course, my dad. Yeah, Joe, come on up. Oh, never mind. We'll come pick you up. A little out of our way. No big deal. Except guess whose car we were driving? My car. I had the most beautiful Ford Escort. It was so cute. 1982 Ford Escort, white on the outside, black interior. I kept that thing pristine. Uncle Joe gets in. He's about this big. 220, 230-pound man. He is not going to fit in my back seat. So guess who sits in the back seat of her car? The girl who said I would never do it. As I sit back there, Uncle Joe takes out his cigarette. What? A cigarette in my car? Lights it up. Pulls open the ashtray and sees a handful of change sitting in there. And what does he do? He takes it and pockets it. Now I was 17. That change was my soda at Circle K or, something that I was going to do for me, my spare change. It could go on and on and on. I could tell you more and more about this, Grudge, but let me tell you something he did to my dad when my dad hit a jackpot that I helped him find and discover through a dream I had. We walked out of a casino $2,500 richer because of something I wanted to do. Now my Uncle Joe wanted half of that because they went together on this trip. It caused a bit of a scene between my uncle and my dad. And it was right in front of me. And it was my last straw. I couldn't do it anymore. This big bully who did this to my dad his whole life is now threatening all of his relationship over a jackpot won in Vegas that he had nothing to do with. I was done. I was so done. I didn't invite him to my wedding. He showed up anyway and cut me off in front of the aisle right as the bride's marching down. Of course he was going to do that. Ah, Uncle Joe. A couple of years later, I now have a little girl. 2, 3 years old. I'm dreaming while she's laying next to me. I'm having this dream. And I'm back in my bed when I was a teenager. And I pick up this phone that I had when I was a teenager. It was a hot pink neon phone. I remember it clearly. I had oodles of conversations on that phone. If it could talk, oh my goodness. On that phone, my Uncle Joe said, Christy, I wanted to apologize for all of those times. You know those times. Yeah, I know those times. I just wanted to tell you I am truly sorry. And I never meant to hurt you. Thank you, Uncle Joe. I appreciate that. Well, I love you and I'm going to go now. Okay. Hung up the phone and woke up as my phone was ringing. And my mom calls to tell me my Uncle Joe had passed away the night before. It's like, wow, where did that come from? That was a gift for me. That was a gift for me to hear an apology to someone who had done things in my life that I would just be so mad about. And I would hang on so hard to. And here I am in my early 20s, receiving what I needed to hear to let it go. Went to his funeral. And the drunk, bad guy, big, huge bully of an Uncle Joe had a standing room only at his funeral. I had no idea the effect he had on oceans of people. There was so many stories told And there was so much emotion in that room. I had a whole different respect for him as I'm looking through his pictures and hearing from his friends and watching these Marines come out to do their honors for his burial. My gosh. When you start to think about how bad somebody treats you, how mad you get, how much you get stomped on, take a lesson from my Uncle Joe. He had many sides to him. And just because I didn't see him when I was younger, doesn't mean I can't see them today. And it doesn't mean that maybe someone in your life that's passed on that you still have anger about, and you still have about. It doesn't mean you can't do the same as sit there and look from their perspective about what was going on with them. We all have a story in us. We all have tragedies. We could talk about our stories and make anybody cry. There's been abuse, there's been abandonment, there's been drug use, there's been addictions, there's been so many things that happen in this world. And the people that have those, they've got stories too. They've had bullies in their life. They've been stomped on a time or two. And they still love. So, in my closing, look at your grudges and put them in some perspective. Mr. Toast.